So one of the real joys of reading ancient texts is a feeling of kind of connection with a long-dead writer. Because in the age of the pandemic, when I can't go out and make real friends, why not hang out with someone who's been dead for 2,000 years? But seriously, reading anything from Herodotus's histories to the letters that Cicero sends to his friends really can give you the impression that you start to know these people. It's a completely one-sided relationship, of course, but that's just the nature of spending your whole day thinking about dead people. You can be pretty fucking certain that they're not thinking about you back. But it's these written sources that paint a picture of the distant past for us 21st century people to gawp at. And for that, I'm eternally grateful to them. But the way that a painting looks is often influenced by the painter as much as it is the subject of the painting. Anyone who knows anything about reading history will tell you that when looking at a primary source, you need to take into account where the writer was from, when they were alive, what their views were, what their religion was, what their personal experiences, if we know about them, were. And then whilst reading the source, be sure to bear these in mind because they are factors that might create a bias. And this is easy enough with Roman history because 90% of our sources come from roughly the same class of people. Wealthy, upper-class Roman men. Which sucks in regards to variety, but it does mean when it comes to that class at least, we have a pretty good idea of their views, their prejudices, and their anxieties. And the thing that they hated most, the thing that caused them the most stress and the most anxiety, was people who weren't from the same class as them, i.e. women, slaves, foreigners, getting acclaim for basically anything at all. Hence their very bizarre relationship with gladiators. Gladiators occupied a weird position in Roman society. They were both kind of like celebrities in that they were adored and idolized, but at the same time they were also dehumanized and died in very, very large numbers just to feed the bloodlust of an entire empire, which is a hell of a predicament. And gladiators were hated for some Romans pretty much for the same reason that they were loved by others. They were the perfect display of everything that the Roman man told himself that he was, a display of virtus, which is a fairly complicated word that we'll come back to in a bit. But it basically kind of means manly, masculine qualities. Physical health and fitness? Check. Combat prowess? Check. Sexual desirability and virility? Oh yes, the gladiators have that in spades. Bravery and defiance of fear in the face of death or injury? Check the job description. And I'm not joking when I say that sexual virility was very much associated with gladiators. Gladiator sweat and gladiator blood were considered to be a kind of sexual medicine that could work for both men and women. It was considered both an aphrodisiac and a potential cure for male impotency. I have an image in my head of someone selling bottles of gladiator sweat as an aphrodisiac. Like, hey, do you want to make yourself more appealing? Well, how about covering yourself in the bodily fluids of a man who is seconds away from being torn apart by a wild animal? Yeah, that should do it. The idea that gladiator sweat might have been some kind of medicine, it was also apparently a cure for epilepsy, which, yeah, I don't think it is. This may all seem nuts to us, and there's a reason for that. It's because it's obviously fucking ridiculous. But that's only clear to us because we have a modern understanding of biology. The Romans were fucking idiots when it came to the science of the body. So pretty much all of their medicine, sexual or otherwise, was fucking bonkers. To the Romans, the links between male sexuality, especially in the violence of the arena, would have been an obvious one. As far as they saw the world, all manly, masculine traits were kind of connected. So if you were good at the one manly thing of killing or being killed by other men, you automatically had to be good at the other manly thing, the sex. Juvenal, a 1st century Roman and serious contender for the unhappiest person that ever lived, rails against the games constantly. Not only is he unhappy that people are seemingly spending all day at the spectacles instead of reading the subtext of his satire and realizing that they actually live in an oppressive authoritarian state, but he's also very annoyed at the amount of female fans the gladiators have that apparently flock to them. Horrible men, as far as Juvenal is concerned, with crooked noses from wearing that helmet and the scars of many combats. This, he says, is what the Roman woman will betray her husband, her children, and her country for. Are these just the bitter ramblings of a deeply unhappy man? Yes, in Juvenal's case, that is precisely what they are. But Juvenal's worst fears, that respectable Roman women might be lured away from their husbands to go to slaves who fight in the arena, seem to have come true at least a few times, because it seems that the gladiators were very, very desirable to some. In Pompeii, for example, when archaeologists dug up the gladiator barracks of the city, not all of the skeletons they found were male gladiators. One of them, who was lying next to one of these gladiators, was a woman who seemed to be pretty upper class because she had all this expensive jewelry on her, including a necklace studded with emeralds. Certainly not of the same societal rank as the gladiator she was lying next to. On top of that, there's all this graffiti, which points to the same conclusion. Oh no, thought people like Juvenal, it's happening. The respectable Roman woman is running away from her well-bred husband and into the arms of a slave. What a crisis this must have caused the Roman man. But as Tertullian puts it, women didn't just give gladiators their bodies, men gave them their souls. I can absolutely picture a scene in which one of our authors, Tacitus, let's say, is taking a break from writing and he's just walking through his villa, enjoying himself. And he comes across his young son playing at a sword fight with one of the slaves. Upon asking him if he's playing a game in which he's a great legionary, or perhaps a hero of myth, the child responds that he is instead impersonating his favourite gladiator. And a look of absolute horror descends over the old man's face, as he realizes that his son would rather be a slave than a Roman. But to the boy, it might have seemed like the most natural person in the world to idolize. The gladiator was showing off every trait that he was being told from birth he would have to impersonate. That of virtus. Virtus is a curious word. It's the root of our modern word virtue, but it has a few extra meanings in its Roman context. It comes from the Latin word vir, meaning man, so it's often translated as manliness or masculinity, and comes with all the connotations of that, so things like military prowess, self-sacrifice, and of course, sexual desirability. There's a great example of this in a story that the Romans told themselves of Gaius Mucius Scaevola. So in 508 BCE, the Etruscan king Lars Porsena laid siege to Rome. Rome, by the way, at this point, small town on the Tiber. You know, they sell salt and they subsistence farm. There's no empire yet. There won't be an empire for centuries to come. So Scaevola was just this regular Roman fella who devised this plan that if he could sneak into the Etruscan camp and kill the king, he might save his city. But alas, he doesn't recognize which of the people in the royal tent is the king, and he stabs the wrong person and is apprehended. Lars Porsena wants to question him, to interrogate him, to figure out why he's there. And he responds by saying, "I am Gaius Mucius, a citizen of Rome, and I came here as an enemy to kill my enemy. And I am as ready to die as I am to kill. We Romans act bravely, and when adversity strikes, we suffer bravely." He then tells Lars Porsena that he is the first of 300 young Roman men ready to sacrifice anything to make sure he dies. He then takes his right hand, holds it in the sacrificial flame nearby, and whilst making perfect fucking eye contact with the king, burns his goddamn hand off of his arm just to prove a point. Terrified, as any sane person would be, by this wanton display of self-harm and disregard for their own body, Lars Porsena makes instant peace with Rome. He's like, right, that's it, I'm leaving. He lifts the siege, he goes home. Gaius Mucius is given a farm on the Tiber by the Roman people as a thank you for saving their city, and he also gets the title Scaevola, which means left-handed, which sounds a bit like a sick joke to me, but you know, he was happy with it. This is the kind of story that a Roman child would probably be told in an attempt to instill some of that virtus in them, that self-sacrifice that Scaevola showed, that virtus that was apparently so abundant in the Romans of the early Republic, or at least so the later Romans thought it was. But the same qualities that Scaevola has in this story, the kill or be killed without flinching, the disregard for personal safety, these are the same traits gladiators show in the arena, no? And that's kind of virtus, isn't it? Except virtus was never meant for slaves. These people at the top, they can show virtus. These people aren't supposed to. The word vir, meaning man, was reserved for the freeborn. Slaves, which most gladiators were called puer, boy, to show their inferiority. Gladiators didn't just get under the skin of our authors by stealing all of the respectable women. They also did it by enjoying the acclaim of people for these qualities of virtus that were the prerogative of freeborn Roman men. And I do mean men. They didn't like women doing it either. The poet Martial talks about a female gladiator who dresses as the goddess Venus, who's the god of love and fertility. So again, you see this kind of bizarre link here between the violence of the arena and sexual virility. But anyways, where was I? Ah, yes. She dresses as the goddess Venus and she fights some lions, and he turns to the emperor and says, "See, Caesar, this is what the courage of women does." Now, although Marshall seems to be a fan of this, he's in the minority when it comes to our written sources. Most of them are very austere towards the idea of women fighting in the arena. And it can't have been comfortable for Romans brought up in this Roman world in which gender roles were very rigid and very strict, to watch women succeed at something that was very masculine, that was very male, was something that only men were meant to do. Perhaps even more uncomfortable than watching a slave do it. Because of this, there's plenty of Roman legislation restricting women of certain classes or origins from participating in the game. There's also a fair bit of legislation that prevented upper class men from doing it, because anything that blurred the line between slave and patrician was a little bit too risky for the Romans. In fact, regarding those nude female gladiators, all these bare-breasted women spearing wild animals caused so much of a stir that Septimius Severus passed a law in 200 CE banning free-born women from fighting in the arena. In the provinces, especially the east of the empire, which had a very, very different view of gender and gender roles to the west, female gladiators seem to have been much more common and much less controversial. It's the East that most of our evidence for female gladiators comes from. It may seem ridiculous to us, the idea that Romans would have gotten anxious and paranoid about gladiators who were clearly not in a position of power as slaves. But then you need to remember just how central the games and the spectacles were to imperial Roman culture and to politics. The emperors couldn't just stop games or manipulate them completely to their will, as is shown by Juvenal's satires and the 2000 Ridley Scott movie Gladiator. He who controlled the mob controlled Rome. It's more than just the tagline of the movie, it's something that actually happened. Granted, not exactly like this, but in a different way. During the reign of the Emperor Claudius, which is when the combats were becoming increasingly popular within the empire, a mock sea battle was planned on a lake just outside Rome. The gladiators, before the fights start, turn to Claudius and say, "We who are about to die salute you." It's worth pointing out that as far as I can tell, this is the only time that this line ever appears in Latin literature. There's no evidence that this is something that gladiators said regularly, it's just something that they said this one time. And Claudius, who regularly said the wrong thing in the wrong situation, as a joke, decided to say, "or maybe not." You know, as a way of being like, well, one of you will survive, there will be a winner to the combat, you won't all die. But the gladiators misinterpret this. They think this is him saying, "I'm going to cancel the combats and spare you all, so you're going to live." So they all turn to each other like, "Oh, great, we don't have to die today. Okay, excellent, right, let's go home, we'll do this on another weekend." But that's not what Claudius meant, and he's already promised the people games. And he knows that if he cancels them now, while everyone's already outside with a ticket, they could start a riot. And so the emperor of the Roman Empire, which is very nearly at the peak of its power, has to come down from his chair into the arena and haggle with the gladiators to get them to fight. Granted, this is a unique case of this happening, but it does go to show how much power a gladiator could wield. To stand victorious as a gladiator in the sands of the Colosseum, with the jeers and applause of the crowd raining down on you, was to be, for just a moment, more powerful than the emperor himself. Because they enjoyed the height of glory, just for a moment, in every other moment of their life they needed to be degraded, reminded of their low station. The games were too important politically to ever take away, but the unusual message being sent by watching sometimes women, often foreigners, almost always slaves, show off those most Roman qualities of Virtus and enjoy the acclaim of the crowd so much, was a source of constant anxiety for our upper-class Romans that make up the majority of our sources. "There is no more wretched position among the people than that of a gladiator," wrote Calpurnius Flaccus, something that needed to be true in order to nullify the threat that they posed to the Roman self-image, their idea of masculinity, and the power of the emperors. Thank you for watching.